Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, inflation hits a 41-year high of over 9% for the year. The Producer Price Index for wholesalers was up 11.3%, also a 40-year high. And Twitter takes Elon Musk to court. We've got that and more tonight on this Friday, July the 15th, 2022. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up on this Friday, July the 15th, 2022. Hope your week went well. Well, this week, the government announced that inflation has set a record not seen since 1981. The Consumer Price Index, which measures prices consumers have to pay, jumped over 9% from June of last year to June of this year. The largest jump was seen in the price of gasoline, rising almost 60% from last year. Energy was up over 40%, and rents increased over 5%. And then yesterday, the Producer Price Index was released, which measures what wholesalers or manufacturers have to pay for goods and services, and that too jumped 11.3%. Now, if manufacturers have to pay an additional 11% to make a product to sell to the retailer, it only stands to reason that these costs are going to be passed on and will be seen in the months to come. Now, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, under the Jimmy Carter years, where inflation reached 14.6%, wages were going up to match inflation. Now, there was a lot more money sloshing through the system. It wasn't worth as much, but workers were still being paid more. But today, you can see that inflation is outpacing wages. And if the Producer Price Index of 11.3% is any indication, it's going to be going up even more. Well, if you've been going to the grocery, you know that costs are rising there as well. Eggs are up over 33%. Chicken is up 19%. Milk, 16%. And butter is rising 26%. Are you planning a trip or maybe just need some transportation? Airfares are now up at over 34%. New cars are up over 12.5%. And that's even if you can find one, never mind if you'd like the right color. And public transportation, that's up 23%. And starting in January of last year, inflation was at 1.4%. And then with government stimulus money being pumped into the economy, added to that zero interest rates and restrictions on domestic oil drilling, inflation jumped to over 5% in June of last year. And by the end of the year of 2021 in December, inflation rose to 7%. And then starting this year in 2022, it started up over 7%, increasing in April to over 8%. And now, for June, last month, we're at 9.1%. Well, coming up tonight, inflation rising over 9%. We'll be talking with the former architect of the 2017 Trump tax cuts and economist Steve Moore. You know, with inflation running hotter than expected and certainly not transitory, as the Federal Reserve had been stating, the board will be meeting in a couple of weeks to decide just how much to raise interest rates. How much higher will they have to raise it? And how to stop this runaway inflation? Well, Steve Moore will be coming up in just a moment. But first, how did the markets do this week? Well, stocks were down throughout the whole week, but soared by the end of the day today. This week, the Dow Jones ended at 31,286, but it was down almost 0.2 of a point for the week. And the S&P 500 closed at 3,862, but down almost 0.9 of a point for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 11,452 and down about almost 1.6% for the week. Well, let's get to our guest this evening. Steve Moore is president and founder of FreedomWorks. He was also a member of the Trump administration's economics team, and he was the architect of the 2017 Trump tax cuts. Also, he was with the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. Best of all, he's back with us tonight. Hi, Steve. Welcome back to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
So good to be with you, Andre. Thanks for having me.
Well, Steve, I'm so happy to have you this week because Just this week, the Consumer Price Index was released, and what we thought we were going to have an 8.8% increase actually turned out to be 9.1. Was that what you were expecting, or did it surprise you?
Oh, I think it surprised me a little bit on the upside. I thought we might see a little bit relief from inflation. Now, it is true that the inflation, that was for the month of June. We've got the first couple of weeks in July under our belt now. So inflation has come down a little bit from those Mount Everest peaks, but we've still very high inflation. And I believe the Fed has been behind the curve in terms of combating this inflation. But I think the major culprit here is runaway spending in Washington that has not been curbed. And we flushed $3 to $4 trillion of additional spending in Trump's last year in office, and then Biden $3 trillion in his first year in office. And all these trillions of dollars had the expected effect that they led to much higher prices. And so we've got to get the spending down. We've got to get the supply side of the economy working. We got to let businesses grow and encourage them to do more investing, because right now, as I look at all the signs, it just doesn't look like a healthy economy right now. It looks like it's really struggling. I think we're in a soft recession. By that, I mean we had negative maybe 2% growth in the first half of this year, which is, not the end of the world, but it's pretty weak. And I'm very concerned about the kind of policy discussions I'm hearing in Washington, which are all talking about more spending, more regulating, and more taxes.
I was reading in the paper this week where Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, is still talking to West Virginia's Joe Manchin about maybe having down what they're calling a slimmed down version of Build Back Better, which is only, and I'm using only in quotes, is only between $750 billion and $1 trillion. And I know Chuck Schumer would like to get closer to the $1 trillion, but do you think, I mean, you've been in Washington long enough. I've never met Joe Manchin. Do you think he's got the fortitude enough to stand his ground and say, no, I'm not going to do it? Or do you think he's getting too much pressure?
Well, first of all, isn't that ironic that we're calling a $500 billion to $1 trillion bill a slimmed down version? That's kind of ironic because we've been spending $1 and $2 and $3 trillion bills, but this is an awful lot of money we're talking about. And I've got to let people know that the victims of this massive tax increase they're talking about, a 4% surcharge in small business income, would be very damaging to the small businesses. By the way, there were over 100 small business associations this week that sent a letter to the Democrats in Congress saying this would really hurt our small businesses, whether they're meat producers, whether they're car dealers, whether they're grocery owners, whether they are people in just construction. They're all saying the same thing, that this would be very negative for their businesses. And let's not forget, this, that at least half of the jobs in this country come from small businesses, and in some surveys it's 2/3 of the jobs come from small businesses. So why are we doing that? Then they're also talking about a potential 5% income tax surcharge on so-called millionaires and billionaires. And if you do all these things, you're going to just reverse the positive effects of the Trump tax cuts. As you know, I work for Donald Trump as one of his senior economic advisors. We put that plan together because we wanted American businesses to prosper and do really well and bring a lot of capital and jobs back to the United States and manufacturing. And we did that. And so I'm very troubled by this. Now, you asked me a very difficult question. What is Joe Manchin going to do next? I don't know if my pay grade is high enough to know the answer to that one. I don't think anyone quite knows. I mean, this is a man who straddles the fence. One day he says one thing, one day he says the other. But a little bit of good news, if there is good news from that terrible inflation report, when it came down, he said, well, maybe now is not a good time to be raising taxes and more spending. And I thought, well, you think? But at least that's some good news out of a day that gave us some really bad news on the direction of the American economy.
Steve, you brought up a very good point about small business owners. And just this past week, I saw a report from the NFIB, which is National Federation of Independent Businesses, right. Small business owners. And they said, basically, what keeps you up at night, meaning small business owners? And I think taxes was number 3, but the first was inflation. Okay. But what surprised me, Steve, was the second one. And how they phrased it was the quality of labor. Now, they didn't say labor, like I just want somebody with a pulse, but a quality of labor. And I'm curious of is, the independent business owners, the small business people that you talk to, are they more concerned also that they would rather have quality and less of it than just a warm body in that spot for their business?
Well, I think they need both. They need quality and quantity, but mostly quality. You're right. A good worker is worth their weight in gold, no question about it. And so this is a problem because you've had a lot of workers who've been sidelined now for 2 years. First it was COVID, and then a lot of people just didn't feel like going back. And a lot of people don't want, if you've been following this whole discussion about a lot of young workers they want to work remotely. They don't want to go back into the office or to the site of the facility. And so this is causing real hardship for small businesses as well. This is the irony right now is that we actually do have a lot of job openings. So while we have runaway inflation, we also have a pretty healthy jobs market, at least for now. Now, I'm a little skeptical that that's going to last a lot longer because I think the economy is slipping into a recession that could last a year or so. And so I think the pace of hiring is going to slow down. By the way, there are 300,000 fewer Americans working today than there were 3 months ago. So for all this, talk about all these, jobs out there, Americans certainly aren't filling them.
And it also, what they're reporting on is when they report the unemployment numbers, these are the people, as you alluded to, these are the people that are applying for unemployment. Those that have just decided just to stop applying, they're not even calculated. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're still slightly below the number of jobs we had before the pandemic. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's about 500,000 fewer people working today than were working in January of 2020. So we haven't even fully recovered from the pandemic. And the other interesting thing about that, by the way, is that if you look at the red states that have, governors like the Ron DeSantis's and the Bill Lees of Tennessee and, the people like, Kristi Noem in South Dakota, they kept their economies pretty much open and they allowed their businesses in a safe way to continue to operate. Whereas a lot of the blue states, like my home state of Illinois and Connecticut and New Jersey and New York and of course California, they shut down a lot of their businesses. So what you're seeing right now is there's been pretty much a full recovery in those states that didn't shut down their businesses and also didn't provide the massive welfare benefits. The blue states are still having real problems getting people back to work.
Yeah. And there's a number of people that, in fact, that's been reported that are leaving blue states and heading to the red states from high tax states like Illinois. And I guess one of the largest ones, speaking of Illinois, there is or was a large financial firm named Citadel. And Ken Griffin, which paid literally millions of dollars into the Illinois tax system, is now pulling up stakes, and they're moving to Miami.
Yeah, that's been happening. That is the trend. Look at, Elon Musk, who's moved out of California, moved to Texas. Almost every day. I'm from Illinois, so I know a lot about that situation. You've had Caterpillar move out. You've had Boeing move out. You've had Citadel. And by the way, it's an interesting story what's been going on with respect to the owner of Citadel, Ken Griffin. He gave hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to the charities in Illinois, to the museums, to the opera, to food banks. He was an incredibly philanthropic guy. And a lot of the charities are saying, gee, where are we going to get the money now to fund our, important philanthropic efforts? So sometimes when you chase out these, quote, evil rich people, it doesn't work so well for your community. They leave big, because, think about all the taxes that Ken Griffin paid in Illinois. Think about all the great things that he helped fund. And, the same thing with so many of these people. And, of course, Florida is now just overflowing with people because so many are leaving these blue states.
True. What about, Steve, you mentioned just a minute ago about a possible that either going into a recession or possibly going into recession. A, do you think that we are going to be heading in? And if so, when? Would it be the latter part of this year, early part of next year? And and I was going to ask you later about the federal, what does that have to do mean the Federal Reserve is going to be meeting in a couple of weeks? So as of now, it was almost guaranteed they were going to do 75 basis points. But with this new numbers this week of being at 9.1%, do you think, your thoughts are, I'm throwing a lot of questions at you right now, and I apologize, but do you think that they're going to have to maybe do it at 100 basis points, which is a whole 1%, or keep it at 75?
I think it's 50-50, between those two options right now. I can't tell you which, but I think you're right to bring that up, that they may now be looking at a slightly larger rate increase than they thought. I'd like to see the Fed, rather than raising interest rates, I'd like to see the Fed start to sell off some of its the government bonds in its balance sheet. I just think that's a cleaner way to, because obviously when the government buys bonds, it puts money into the economy. When it sells the bonds, it takes the money out of the economy, and we just have too much money sloshing around in the economy right now. Look at any chart of M1 or M2; it just went straight up in 2020, and it's still at record heights. And so there's just too much money. But we also have to concentrate. There's a reason they call economists like myself and Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow supply side economists, because we want to increase the productive capacity of the economy. It's an old saying: if the economy produces more apples, the price of apples goes down. It doesn't go up. So one way to get inflation down is to produce more, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious. How are you going to produce more if you've got these nitwits in Washington talking about more taxes, more spending, more regulation? That's only to contract the economy. We've got to do what Reagan did: control the money supply, and then get taxes and regulations down, and we could have a nice recovery. But I'm just not hearing those ideas coming out of this Congress or this president.
Do you think that they're going to have to raise interest rates above what the inflation rate is right now, which is
that would be quite a huge rate increase, wouldn't it? I mean, if you did that,
section, right? Yeah,
that would be an enormous rate increase, because you got inflation at, even if it's now at maybe 6 or 7%, just in the most recent months, what's the Fed funds rate at now? 2.5%. So you really have to have a series of very severe rate increases. I mean, and remember, this happened in 1982 when you had Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. The last time we had, then they talk about 40-year high. The last time we had this high was when Paul Volcker had to take these very serious steps to bring inflation down. And I remember you and I probably both remember how severe that recession was.
Yeah. And I remember hearing just recently how Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, was saying, this was maybe about a month ago or so, that he thought, in his opinion, you had to raise rates above to whatever the inflation rate is. Well, 8% is one thing. Now we're at 9%. So
I don't think the economy could withstand that. I think you'd see a massive stock sell-off. It would be really bad. And that's why, the Fed has acted so irresponsibly, because you don't want, I've said this before on your show, that inflation is like a cancer cell. You want to remove that cancer cell as soon as you find it, so it doesn't metastasize. Because once it metastasizes, getting rid of it is much more painful and potentially deadly. And that's what we've let the inflation rate go from, less than 2% under Trump to 2.5% to 5% to 8% to now we're at 9% inflation. It's going to take a lot of heavy lifting to get that out of the system. But look, I'm still bullish on America. I don't think people should be panicked and sell all their stocks or things like that, especially if you're in the stock market for the long run. You and I probably lived through about 7 or 8 recessions.
Absolutely.
They're painful things.
Many of
you just have,
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to get through it.
Yeah. Steve, you're a supply side economist, and you were mentioning how growth of business will be able to help out with this. Just recently, and you were where you are about to give a speech, maybe you have or haven't heard it, but the administration just decided to not revoke or suspend the Jones Act. Now, the Jones Act was being brought up because just recently, a couple of weeks ago, they had a number of oil CEOs with Jennifer Granholm and for their opinion on how to lower oil and gas. And one of the largest reasons that they said is keeping is with the Jones Act is being able to having, and it's a law that goes many, many years, but because the unions are supposedly against revoking or suspending the Jones Act for a time being, the administration has decided not to take that advice.
Yeah, I think most economists would agree with what you just said, that the Jones Act raises prices and it's harmful. But look, the most important thing is we've got to start developing American energy again. When Trump left office, we were energy independent. We were producing record amounts of oil and gas and coal. And because of this war on American energy, this is one of the contributing factors to the high inflation, is we're not producing as much energy at a time when you've got, chaos throughout the world, especially with Russia and Ukraine. And so that's led to the big spikes in energy prices. And the shame is, I don't think this would have happened if we just continued to drill, as the saying goes, and producing as much energy as we can. We have 500 years worth of coal, we have 250 years worth of oil, 300 years worth of natural gas. We should be using all the energy that we have, and that would help bring inflation down too. And so, look, I think I'm short-term pessimistic, but always with this country, I'm long-term optimistic, and I think we will get through this.
Do you think, Steve, because of in an ironic way, with a recession possibly on the horizon, unfortunately, that means many people may be losing their jobs, which means less driving, which means there will be more oil on the market, which means oil will then be going down? Is my scenario?
Yes. Yeah. Short term, when you have, and that's why you're seeing in June, so far in the late June and early July, as the economy slides into this, ditch, you're seeing less consumer demand. Mm-hmm. You're seeing less producer demand to produce things, and therefore that's bringing prices down. That's not a good way to produce prices, by putting people in unemployment lines. So I want to get prices down with people still working. I don't want to see the economy collapse. I hope that helps, and I hope that people get through this. I always root for America. You cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. So we've lived through tough times. We always get through this. I think in November, you'll see a bit of a regime change in Washington with the elections. When you have 82% of Americans feeling like the country's headed in the wrong direction, those are really bad numbers for the incumbent party. And so hopefully when that happens, then I hope Joe Biden will do what Bill Clinton did, and then move back to the middle, so we can get some good policies out of Washington.
Sure. If you're just joining us right now, we're talking with Steve Moore. We're going to take a moment, but don't go away, because we'll be right back. We're back right now. We're talking with Steve Moore. Steve, thank you so much. I know you're going to just as a wrap up right now, just out of curiosity with real estate. Right now, housing markets will probably be cooling off. Do you think this will increase the real estate market will be going even further into a slowdown?
Yeah, yes, yeah. The answer, unfortunately. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but, let's go back to what we were talking about before with these rising interest rates. If you see, interest rates, which are now at about 5.6, 5.7, go back up to 6.5%, 7%, that adds to the cost of buying a new home. And, you and I lived through that horrible 2008 and 9 recession when we had the financial collapse because of the bubble in the housing market. So, we should be nervous about housing as well, because when those housing bubbles collapsed, remember, it caused a lot of banks to collapse and so on. So again, I don't think we're headed to anything like 2008 and 9. But I do think we're in for a soft path over the next year or so.
Steve, thank you so much. I always love having you on the show, and I hope you come back.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it pithy, make it concise, and write us at Andre@WallStreetWrapUp.info. And now for a look ahead for the market information for next week. But first, what aeronautical engineer incorporated the Pacific Aero Products Company in Seattle on this day in 1917? We've got the answer in a moment. What aeronautical engineer incorporated the Pacific Aero Products Company in Seattle on this day in 1917? Bill Boeing. The following year, he decided to rename his company just with his last name, Boeing, and it all started on this day, 105 years ago today. Well, with inflation rising, it's no secret that the Federal Reserve wants to cool down the housing market. It looks as if it's working, too. The number of homes actively listed has grown nationwide to a double-digit annual pace. And the latest read from this week shows a supply is now up to 28% since last year. Now, that's interest rates are going up. Listed homes are sitting longer. Many homes are now sitting longer and might be putting an end to those bidding wars that we've been seeing for the last 12 months. As more Americans are worried about inflation, fewer are buying homes. And when they are, they're buying less expensive ones. Now, the cost of a 30-year mortgage is now at 5.7%. But the price of the average home, even with inflation, has now dropped. The cost of a home this week, on average, is now at $415,000, which is a 9.8% decrease. Sellers are now dropping their asking price, and the top 10 cities where sellers had to cut are Boise, Idaho, where sellers had to slash their price by 61%. Denver slashing theirs by over 50%, along with Salt Lake City and one-time top markets including Tampa, Florida, and Sacramento, California. And pre-pandemic, before March of 2020, Boise, Idaho prices went up 60%. Nationwide prices rose over 40%. But sellers are getting the message that the sky is no longer the limit, with mortgage rates now double from what they were at just the start of this year, and adding to it inflation, to what everyone else's, the consumers have to buy, is hitting housing affordability very hard. And finally, now you may remember in 2018, Starbucks made the decision to let anyone use their bathrooms to stay in their coffee shops without having to buy anything. Well, the announcement came after an incident where two African-American men were denied the use of a Starbucks Philadelphia bathroom. They were sitting at the Starbucks saying they were waiting for someone and didn't order anything. The barista called the police, but no charges were ever filed. Well, in 2018, Starbucks said that all bathrooms were open to anyone, even if they weren't paying customers. This week, Starbucks is announcing they'll be closing 16 stores due to crime concerning drug deals and even being conducted inside their bathrooms. Crime in the cities are even getting so bad that Starbucks is providing their baristas with active shooter training in cities such as Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. So instead of changing the rules at Starbucks, stating they have to buy a cup of coffee to sit or use the bathroom, they've decided to close the stores. Well, as a reminder, remember, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way, set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. That's our show for Friday, July the 15th, 2022. Hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to Steve Moore for joining us this evening. Always, though, it's you. We appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember to follow us on all the social media, Facebook, also YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So, have a great weekend ahead and a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap Up, I'm Andre Laborde. Remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.